Hey everyone, and welcome back to the 1 Minute Writing Tip podcast. I'm so excited for today's interview with author guest Libby Webber, who is the author of The Assassin's Legacy. She is also a self-defense instructor and a human trying to inspire others. Libby, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So, will you just start off sharing about your journey into publishing your first book and what that looked like for you?
Sure. My first book took me 10 years to publish because I wrote it in college. I went to school for creative writing, wrote the first book, and got married and had children. My husband's in the military, moved across the world twice. I went back to school for my master's in library and information sciences, and then decided I wanted to publish my book. So it
Wow.
was a long journey, but I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, there's so much. I feel like there's so much between the lines of, like, here's the bullet points, but here's all the things underneath the surface that happened. Would you agree?
Yeah, there was a lot that happened. My book grew a lot. It was actually a young adult book when I started it. And then after growing up and having kids, it got a little bit darker. And then I shifted it into the adult genre.
Awesome. I can actually relate to many aspects of your story, like going to college for creative writing and then getting married and having kids, and just the adventure and the journey that happens when you're young and you start out writing, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh wait, life has all of these other responsibilities and things that kind of just come your way, and it ends up becoming a part of your writing as well, because ultimately writing is expressing, your interior self, I guess. It's very vulnerable, and so you end up expressing things that you've learned in life through that. So what has been your experience as you were finally getting to the point that you were like getting more serious about it and seriously looking at, okay, I'm gonna do this thing. Like, what did that actually look like for you?
It was a conversation with one of my writing partners that I was like, man, I have this manuscript. I keep going back to it. And she's like, if you're going to do it, just do it. And we actually sat down and did a timeline in 8 months. I went through, did final edits, found an editor. I did the cover myself. So that kind of saved me a little bit of time and money. And then a lot of research on how to self-publish because it's not easy. I was like,
Yeah,
oh yeah, you just like throw it up on Amazon. No, you
no,
don't just throw it
that's
up on
probably
Amazon.
the biggest mistake that first time authors make, is thinking they can just throw it up there. It's like, no, please don't do that. Like, make sure it's high quality and it competes with the traditional publishers and all that. So yeah, great point. So after going through that journey, what would be the top pieces of advice that you would have for some of our listeners that might be in the same place that you were before, where they've had this dream for a long time, but they haven't actually jumped in to do it yet, and they're wanting to say, okay, I want to do this. I want to not look back with regret, wishing I had done it sooner, but they're still struggling with how to actually make that happen. What would be your advice for them?
Um, get an accountability partner, first of all. Set a hard deadline, but don't rush it. Don't rush it. Um, I pushed my deadline out, I think, once. And I'm glad I did. It gave me more time to get the edits in, but it's a journey. It's not a sprint. So take your time, because the first books, I think, is the hardest. You got to finish it, you're getting it out there. So take your time kind of navigating. And then once you know what you're doing, then you don't have to go back and fix all the pieces that you messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And you're right. It's not a sprint. It really is a marathon, and it's something you have to, keep working at consistently. I think a lot of people have the idea that you're supposed to just sit down and kind of just voila, and that's just not reality. It's setting yourself up for discouragement. So yeah, that makes sense. So talk to me a little bit more about, with you kind of mentioned that you're a self-defense instructor, and so I'm kind of curious how that comes into your writing and how that plays out with your books.
It plays out really well. I have not always done martial arts. I actually did not start martial arts till I was almost 30. So just a couple years ago, I was like, my kids were doing it. I'm like, I want to do it. And I fell in love with it, became an instructor, and it enhanced all of my writing because I already had written fight scenes. I love like martial arts movies. I love Power Rangers. But having the hands-on experience of being able to actually, okay, this is actually how it would work, really enhanced all of my writing. All of my fight scenes got better. My characters got better because I understood their mentality more than just like, oh, they would do this in a fight. Like, oh no, they would do this because they think that. So just kind of taking an aspect of something I loved and diving into it allowed me to create richer characters in general.
I love that. Yeah, and great point too, because it is valuable to bring in your expertise, even with a fiction book, and really use that in your in developing your craft or the way that you approach different things. I think that's a great way to build characters, and I think it also allows the reader to experience the story in a much more realistic and dynamic way and really get a lot more immersed into what they're reading, and that's super valuable.
Yeah, I definitely found that it helped a lot bring just all the characters to life and the story. There's a lot of violence in the story, more so once I started self-defense than before, because before you just kind of have this idea of the movies and what it looks like, but unless you do it, you just like if you tried to write about archery, but you've never done archery, you would be missing a lot of key components of how the thought process works.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you mentioned about the movies, because I think in our modern age where pretty much everything is on screen, that it's really easy to try to incorporate those visuals into your writing because you're just so used to watching movies or shows or whatever. And
Yeah,
you have to remember that sometimes what you're seeing on the movie isn't actually realistic. It's like cinematized and dramatized for the audience. And it's like, oh, wait. And then when you do some research or you actually do get into doing the thing, like you said, archery or self-defense or whatever it is, that all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, hold on. Reality's actually a little bit different. And when
it
you're
doesn't
writing,
actually work that way.
yeah, right. Yeah. And you have to actually incorporate that in a much better way in your writing. So
Yeah, I do that with all of my fight scenes. I'll write them out and then my husband trains with me and we go and we read it and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't work. Or hey, we can make it better. Because yeah, you're like, oh, let's see how cool it looks. I'm like, this looks ridiculous. Like you can't do that. Let's change it.
yeah, absolutely. And I can relate to that because I write fantasy under a pen name, and I have done probably way too much research on different elements of fighting and combat and all that kind of stuff, just trying to make sure that my scenes are believable and fun and exciting. And if I feel like I'm not gonna be able to give enough detail in a way that's realistic, I kind of just step back from it and I just kind of imply what's happening so that the reader can create it in their mind and not be like, wait a second, this is not going to work.
It reminds me of like romance when they're having spicy scenes and you get like extra hands in there and you're like, did we grow extra hands?
Right.
So just
Yes.
being able to like just keeping it kind of realistic but also exciting at the same time, like tracking it.
Right. Yeah, I like for those especially, it's like don't be afraid to kind of share the awkward moments too, because like let's be real, that it's not always the way it's painted in those romance scenes, even in movies or whatever. So yeah.
I love romance books. That's like my jam. I don't write them. Could never write them. I tried, doesn't work. But I love romance books. So
Yeah, I think there's a little part of all of us that kind of loves romance books because it just kind of shows you the fantasy of the perfect life, like the perfect relationship or however you wish that things would be or whatever that looks like, So yeah. So we're in the process of book number 2, right?
I am. So
Okay. So how is that going? And what are you doing differently from the lessons that you learned through doing book 1?
I'm doing a lot differently. Book 1, I rewrote it 4 times, from scratch. So I had one perspective, it was young adult, went back, scratched it, wrote it again, went back, added a secondary perspective, and then like scratched a lot of that and wrote it again. I'm actually plotting this time. I didn't plot last time. I just kind of ran with it. Like I said, I tried querying for a little bit and then I just kept putting it away. I'm like, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. But this time I got myself a developmental editor. She is amazing. We check in every 2 to 3 weeks to see where I'm at. And I'm like, okay, does this make sense in my big vision? So I would highly suggest a developmental editor for anyone who's trying to figure something out. They're worth every penny. And I'm creating a book Bible because I didn't do that the first time. So my niece and I had to sit down and actually categorize everything from book 1. So it was congruent with book 2. So having a, like, if you know you're going to do a series, like everyone's eye color, everyone's favorite color, all that stuff, written out, who died when, instead of accidentally bringing people back to life. I did that once already. We had to re-kill them. So a couple of things are different in terms of organization. I have a hard deadline. I'm having it ready for January. And just having the editors lined up, everyone lined up, and making sure you make time to write, which I think is the hardest part for everyone, is words to paper.
Yes. Yeah. You shared so many golden nuggets just in that answering of that question. I love it. Yeah, and you nailed it right on the head, because again, there's this idea that writing is just, someone just pops the book out, and the reality, especially for people that finally do jump in and really go for it, it's like, oh, it really is work. There's all these different aspects involved, and there's just so much behind the scenes, and the end product is always worth it, especially if you do the work to make sure it's that the plot holes are filled in and that everything comes together correctly. And I totally agree with you on the editor point, because it's so true. It just, even just having that person that has that third party experience and the professionalism and all of that to come in and to say, okay, this is what you need to change. It's so valuable. So I love that you shared that. Man, like I said, you had so many golden nuggets right there, and it's a lot to unpack. So yeah. So as you're thinking about that hard deadline of January, are you trying to actually launch book 2 by New Year's, or what does that look like for you?
I want book 2 to be launched by like January 17th. That's my goal. It was supposed to be this month, but I had a setback at work and it set me back about 4 months. So I had to adjust my timeline because I didn't have enough time to write, since I'm not making millions just yet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's a good point too, is that you kind of mentioned it in the beginning that you have to like let writing take its course. It's not a sprint, and just go with the flow a little bit with it. And that's one of the cool things about being a writer and doing books, is that when those life events happen, you can pivot and you can make the adjustments that you need to make, and you don't have to have that pressure of like a boss that's like giving you a hard deadline no matter what, like come hell or high water. And so that's also a blessing.
Yeah.
Doing writing.
Yeah, I like that about the self-publishing, is I'm able to set my own schedule, and I could take the week off if I need to do stuff with the kids and not feel like I'm gonna fall super behind. Now I am hard on myself with my deadlines. Like I just missed my deadline with my editor. I'm like, I'll get it to you this week, I swear. But it's also a little bit softer because I'm in control of it, and so it's my money, it's my product that I'm taking longer with. So I'm not holding up like a big publishing house that's gonna take back my advance or something.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, definitely. And like you said, it's kind of just weighing the pros and cons and seeing what you really want to do with it and where you want to go. So yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like you've got a very exciting book. Book number 2 is in the series. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How many books total are you thinking you're going to have?
Right now there's, okay, so maybe just 2 or 3. I don't know. It was supposed to be 1 book, and I got to the end of book 1. I'm like, it's not done yet. I'm working through book 2. It looks like there may be a book 3, but I've got a couple other fantasy series I want to work on. So once I wrap this one up, I might just duology it and then maybe come back to the world after. I've been working that world for about 17 years, on and off with all the characters, and I'm ready to kind of explore other ones. But I wanted to get their story out and kind of complete before I moved on to something else.
Oh yeah, I can 100% relate to that. You kind of want to finish something, but at the same time, it's like, oh man, I've been in this one so long. So yeah. So if someone's listening and they're thinking, oh my goodness, I'd love to check out the book, and especially with all those action scenes with the martial arts that you do, how can they learn more about you and your book and ultimately connect with you?
I have my website, libbywebber.com. I'm active on Facebook, Libby Webber. I think it's _author. It's all on my website. I'm sometimes active on TikTok. I go in about like months spurts. But you'll see all fun fight scenes because I'll post those up there. So if you wanted to see me getting beat up and beating people up, that's where you can find it. Yeah, and those are basically the places I hang out, is Facebook and my website and TikTok.
Awesome. That sounds so fun. I love it. So for all my listeners, if you want to learn more about martial arts or see our guest Libby doing martial arts, or otherwise just check out her book, then I will leave her information in the description for you guys. Libby, thank you again so much for joining me. It was such a great time to have you.
Thank you so much for having me as well. It was great.
So for all my listeners, thank you also for tuning in. Please do leave a review wherever you're listening from, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.